The silence in NORAD's command center was broken only by the steady hum of supercomputers processing millions of data points per second. Dr. Isabella Vasquez moved through the sterile corridors with the practiced invisibility of someone who had perfected the art of being overlooked. Her weathered hands gripped the industrial mop handle, the yellow bucket wheels squeaking softly against the polished concrete floors that reflected the harsh LED lighting overhead. She had been cleaning these same floors for 3 years, 7 months, and 16 days. Not that anyone was counting. Not that anyone even noticed her presence among the uniformed officers who moved with the confident urgency of people protecting America's nuclear arsenal. Colonel Marcus Blackwood stood at his command station, his steel-grey eyes scanning multiple monitors displaying satellite feeds from across the globe. His uniform was pressed to military perfection, each ribbon and decoration precisely positioned to reflect 22 years of distinguished service. He barely registered the cleaning woman's approach until her bucket bumped against his workstation. "Watch where you're going," he snapped without looking away from his screens, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Isabella muttered something in Spanish under her breath, her accent thick enough to cut with a knife. "Lo siento, señor. Very sorry. I finish quick, no bother you more." The broken English grated against Blackwood's ears like fingernails on a chalkboard. 3 years of listening to this woman's butchered attempts at communication, and she still couldn't manage a proper apology. He watched from his peripheral vision as she bent over her mop bucket, her greying hair escaping from beneath a hairnet that had seen better days. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoyed this opening, consider subscribing for more stories where ordinary people hide extraordinary secrets. Captain Derek Thornfield, the facility's communications director, approached Blackwood's station with a tablet displaying the morning's intelligence briefings. At 38, Thornfield carried himself with the confidence of an officer destined for higher command, his blonde hair styled in regulation cut, his blue eyes sharp with ambition. "Colonel, we've got some unusual chatter picked up by the listening posts," Thornfield reported, casting an annoyed glance at Isabella as she continued mopping around their feet. "Encrypted transmissions on frequencies that aren't supposed to exist." Blackwood frowned, his attention finally shifting from the satellite feeds. "Define unusual." "Quantum encrypted bursts that lasted exactly 3.7 seconds each, transmitted every 47 minutes for the past 6 hours. The pattern suggests coordination, but we can't crack the encryption." Isabella's mop moved in slower, more deliberate strokes as she listened to their conversation. Her dark eyes, which most people dismissed as empty and uncomprehending, were actually cataloguing every word with the precision of someone trained to extract intelligence from casual conversations. "Any idea who's behind it?" Blackwood asked, accepting the tablet and scrolling through the technical analysis. "NSA thinks it might be Chinese, but the transmission points don't match any known PLA facilities. CIA suggests Russian sleeper cells, but the timing intervals don't fit their typical operational patterns." Isabella bumped her bucket again, this time hard enough to slosh dirty water onto the floor. Both officers turned to glare at her. "Jesus Christ," Thornfield muttered. "Can't you do your job without disrupting ours?" Sorry, Isabella repeated, her English fracturing under their scrutiny. "This floor very, how you say, difficult to clean good." Blackwood's jaw tightened with barely contained irritation. "It's called difficult to clean well, and if you can't handle basic janitorial duties without interfering with classified operations, perhaps you should find employment elsewhere." Isabella's face showed no reaction to the verbal abuse, though her knuckles whitened slightly around the mop handle. She had endured worse than harsh words during her 3 years of deep cover. Much worse. "I clean better now," she said meekly, pushing her bucket toward the next section of the command center. As she moved away, Thornfield lowered his voice. "I don't understand why we can't get English-speaking cleaning staff for a facility this sensitive." "Security clearance requirements," Blackwood replied absently, his attention already returning to the intelligence reports. "She's been vetted 6 ways from Sunday. Background check shows she's exactly what she appears to be, an uneducated immigrant who needs the work." If only they knew, Isabella thought as she continued her methodical cleaning. If only they understood that her background check had been carefully constructed by some of the most sophisticated intelligence professionals in the world. The truth was that Dr. Isabella Marie Vasquez held 3 doctorate degrees from MIT, spoke 7 languages fluently, and had spent 15 years designing the quantum encryption protocols that protected America's most sensitive nuclear communications systems. The same systems that were now being probed by unknown adversaries using techniques that shouldn't have existed. She had faked her death in a car accident outside Denver 3 years ago when she discovered that someone with high-level security clearance was selling American nuclear defense protocols to foreign intelligence services. Rather than trust a system that had already been compromised, she had chosen to disappear and resurface as someone nobody would suspect, a cleaning lady with broken English and a fabricated immigration history. The irony was perfect. She spent her days mopping floors around the very systems she had helped design, listening to officers discuss threats to networks she had created, watching for signs of the infiltration she knew was coming. And based on what she had just heard about the quantum encrypted transmissions, that infiltration was accelerating. Isabella pushed her bucket toward the central command console, where Major Sarah Chen was coordinating with satellite tracking stations across the Pacific. Chen was one of the few officers who treated the cleaning staff with basic human courtesy, offering polite nods and genuine thanks when Isabella worked around her station. "Any updates on those unusual transmissions?" Chen was asking into her headset. "Negative, Major. The pattern continues, but we're no closer to identifying the source or content." Isabella's movements slowed as she absorbed this information. Quantum encryption using 3.7-second bursts at 47-minute intervals wasn't random. It was a signature she recognized from her own work on experimental communication protocols 5 years earlier. Someone was using her own research against the systems she had built to protect. The realization hit her like ice water in her veins. The encrypted transmissions weren't just intelligence gathering, they were preparation for something much worse. Someone was mapping the communication pathways that would need to be severed before launching a coordinated attack on America's nuclear defense network. Isabella forced herself to continue mopping, even as her mind raced through the implications. The timing intervals of 47 minutes corresponded to the rotation schedule of orbital surveillance satellites. The 3.7-second burst duration was precisely long enough to transmit a complete system diagnostic while remaining below the threshold that would trigger automatic security alerts. Whoever was behind this understood her systems better than the people currently operating them. The afternoon shift change brought new personnel into the command center, but the routines remained constant. Isabella had memorized every protocol, every security procedure, every weakness in the human element that surrounded her technological creations. Lieutenant Commander James Morrison arrived to relieve Thornfield, his movements crisp and professional as he assumed control of the communications station. Morrison was younger than Thornfield, perhaps 32, with the intense focus of someone who took his responsibilities seriously. "Anything significant to report?" Morrison asked as he reviewed the shift logs. "Those encrypted transmissions are still ongoing," Thornfield replied, gathering his personal items. "Same pattern, same frequency. Intelligence is baffled." Morrison frowned at the technical readouts. "Have we considered that this might be a test of our detection capabilities rather than actual intelligence gathering?" "What do you mean?" "Someone probing to see how quickly we notice unusual patterns, how we respond to unidentified transmissions. They might be mapping our defensive reactions rather than our systems." Isabella's mop paused mid-stroke. Morrison's insight was uncomfortably close to the truth. The transmissions were indeed a form of reconnaissance, but not in the way he imagined. They were testing something far more dangerous. "That's actually a disturbing possibility," Thornfield admitted. "I'll make sure the night shift is aware of your theory." As Thornfield departed and Morrison settled into his duties, Isabella continued her cleaning with renewed urgency. She needed to get closer to the central command console, needed to see the technical details of those transmissions for herself. But approaching the most sensitive area of NORAD while pushing a mop bucket required careful timing and a legitimate reason. She waited until Morrison became absorbed in coordinating with Pacific Fleet Communications, then deliberately knocked over her water bucket near the central console. The dirty water spread across the floor in a dark puddle that threatened to reach the expensive electronic equipment. "Oh no," Isabella exclaimed in her heavily accented English. "So sorry! I cleaned quick, no damage!" Morrison jumped back from the spreading water. "Careful, that equipment is worth more than—" He stopped himself before completing what would have been an insulting comparison. Isabella dropped to her knees with paper towels, frantically mopping up the spill while positioning herself directly in front of the main display screen. For 30 seconds, she had an unobstructed view of the transmission analysis data. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. The quantum encryption signatures weren't just familiar. They were identical to protocols she had developed for Project Prometheus, a classified research initiative that had been terminated and supposedly destroyed 3 years ago. Project Prometheus had been designed to create unbreakable communication links for emergency coordination during nuclear crisis scenarios. If someone had access to Prometheus protocols, they could potentially insert false commands into the communication network during a real emergency, creating chaos precisely when clear coordination was most critical. "Ma'am, please step back from the equipment," Morrison said firmly. "I'll have maintenance come up to ensure no water got into the systems." Yes, very sorry," Isabella repeated, gathering her cleaning supplies and moving away from the console. But she had seen enough. The transmission pattern wasn't random. It was a systematic test of the Prometheus backdoors she had built into the system as emergency access points. Backdoors that were supposed to be known only to her and 2 other people, both of whom had died in the same accident that had supposedly killed her. Someone had not only survived that accident, but had spent 3 years figuring out how to exploit her own security measures. Isabella spent the remainder of her shift in a state of controlled panic, her mind working through scenarios and contingencies while her hands performed the mindless routine of cleaning. By the time she clocked out at 1800 hours, she had reached a disturbing conclusion about what the encrypted transmissions were preparing for. The next morning brought confirmation of her fears in the form of elevated alert status throughout the facility. Isabella arrived for her 0600 shift to find NORAD buzzing with nervous energy and heightened security protocols. All non-essential personnel are restricted to designated areas, Colonel Blackwood announced over the facility's public address system. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Isabella pushed her cleaning cart through corridors filled with officers moving with urgent purpose. Fragments of conversation reached her ears as she worked, satellite communications experiencing intermittent failures, backup systems showing anomalous readings, unable to verify authentication codes from 3 separate monitoring stations. Each overheard detail added another piece to the puzzle Isabella was assembling in her mind. The Prometheus backdoors weren't just being tested, they were being systematically activated to create precisely the kind of communication breakdown that would paralyze America's nuclear defense network during a real crisis. She managed to position herself near Colonel Blackwood's station as he received a secure communication from NORAD's command authority. "Understood, General," Blackwood was saying into his headset. "We're showing the same anomalies here. Communication integrity is degrading across all primary channels." Isabella's blood ran cold. If communication integrity was failing, it meant someone was actively using the Prometheus protocols to inject false data into the network. The test phase was over. This was the beginning of an actual attack. "Sir," Major Chen called from her station. "I'm reading what appears to be an incoming missile signature, but the data is inconsistent." Blackwood spun toward her station. "Inconsistent how?" "The trajectory data keeps changing. First it showed an ICBM launch from North Korea, then the signature shifted to indicate a submarine-based launch from the Pacific. Now it's showing multiple launch points." Isabella felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Multiple false launch signatures were exactly what the Prometheus system would generate if someone was using the emergency coordination protocols to create a phantom attack scenario. "This doesn't make sense," Blackwood said, moving to Chen's station. "Are we looking at system malfunctions or actual threats?" "Unknown, sir. I can't verify anything through normal channels because our communication links keep dropping out." Isabella knew she was out of time. The attack wasn't designed to actually launch nuclear weapons. It was designed to create so much confusion and communication breakdown that America's nuclear defense would be paralyzed when a real attack came. And based on the escalating pattern, that real attack was probably less than an hour away. She abandoned her cleaning cart and walked directly toward the central command console, ignoring the startled looks from officers who had never seen the cleaning lady approach sensitive equipment. "Ma'am, you need to return to your designated area," Lieutenant Morrison said firmly. Isabella ignored him and continued walking toward Colonel Blackwood. "Colonel," she said, her accent suddenly much lighter than anyone had ever heard it. "You need to shut down the Prometheus protocols immediately before they completely compromise your defensive network." The command center fell silent, except for the beeping of warning alarms. Every eye turned toward the cleaning woman who had just used technical terminology that shouldn't have existed in her vocabulary. Blackwood stared at her with a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. "What did you just say?" Isabella straightened to her full height, and suddenly her entire posture changed. The hunched shoulders of a tired cleaning woman gave way to the bearing of someone accustomed to being in command of sophisticated technical operations. "My name is Dr. Isabella Marie Vasquez," she said, her English now crisp and precise with only the faintest trace of an accent. "I designed the quantum encryption protocols your facility uses to secure nuclear communications. 3 years ago, I discovered that someone with high-level clearance was selling access to those protocols to foreign intelligence services." She pulled out her phone and began entering a complex sequence of numbers. "Rather than trust a compromised system to investigate itself, I faked my death and took a position here where I could monitor for signs of infiltration." "This is insane," Morrison said. "You're a janitor." Isabella's phone connected to the facility's main computer system through a hidden access port she had built into the original network architecture. Authentication screens began appearing on monitors throughout the command center. "I'm the senior systems architect who built this entire facility's defense network," Isabella said as she entered authentication codes that most of the officers had never seen before. "And right now, someone is using my own security protocols to blind you to an incoming attack." The main display screen began showing data that hadn't been visible moments before. Real-time analysis of the quantum transmissions, their actual source points, and the systematic way they were being used to inject false data into the communication network. "Jesus Christ," Blackwood whispered as he saw the scope of the deception. "How long has this been going on?" "The active phase started this morning," Isabella replied, her fingers flying across the interface she had designed. "But they've been mapping our defensive responses for months. Every protocol you followed during today's crisis was observed and catalogued to ensure maximum confusion during the real attack." "Real attack?" Chen asked. Isabella's screen displayed satellite tracking data showing multiple submarine signatures moving toward the American coast. Chinese Type 094 nuclear submarines, currently 47 minutes from optimal launch position. The communication breakdown was designed to prevent you from detecting them until it was too late to coordinate a response. The command center erupted into controlled chaos as officers rushed to verify the submarine threat through independent channels. But Isabella was already working to restore the communication systems by isolating and neutralizing the Prometheus backdoors. "Even if you're telling the truth," Blackwood said, "we still can't verify your identity or authority." Isabella paused in her work long enough to look him directly in the eyes. "Colonel, in approximately 30 seconds, your secure phone is going to ring. The person calling will be General Patricia Hayes, Director of NORAD. She's going to confirm my identity and give you direct orders to follow my instructions without question." Blackwood stared at her. "How could you possibly know?" His secure phone rang. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, during which Blackwood's expression progressed from skepticism to shock to grim understanding. "Dr. Vasquez," he said formally after ending the call. "General Hayes has confirmed your identity and authorized you to take whatever action necessary to restore our defensive capabilities." Isabella nodded and returned to her work. "I need all personnel to follow my instructions exactly. We have approximately 35 minutes to restore full communication integrity before those submarines reach launch position." For the next 30 minutes, the woman they had dismissed as an ignorant cleaning lady orchestrated the most complex cyber defense operation in NORAD's history. Her commands flowed in rapid succession as she isolated compromised systems, rerouted communications through secure backup channels, and gradually restored the facility's ability to coordinate with other defense installations. "Communication with Pacific Fleet restored," Chen reported. "Satellite tracking systems back online," Morrison added. "Submarine threats confirmed and targeted," announced another officer. Isabella watched the main display as America's defensive network came back to life under her guidance. The Chinese submarines, suddenly exposed by restored surveillance capabilities, began emergency retreats toward international waters. "Threat level decreasing," Blackwood announced. "All submarine contacts are withdrawing." Isabella finally stepped back from the central console, exhaustion evident in her posture for the first time. "The immediate threat is neutralized, but you'll need to completely rebuild your communication security from the ground up. Everything they had access to is compromised." She looked around the command center at the officers who were staring at her with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. "For 3 years, you've seen me as exactly what I wanted you to see," she said quietly. "An invisible woman whose presence was so unremarkable that you never questioned it. That invisibility was my greatest asset in detecting this infiltration." Blackwood cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Dr. Vasquez, I owe you an apology for—" "You owe me nothing, Colonel," Isabella interrupted. "You responded exactly as you should have to someone you perceived as a security risk. The fact that your perception was deliberately cultivated doesn't change the appropriateness of your reaction." She moved toward her abandoned cleaning cart. "I'll be submitting my resignation from custodial services, effective immediately. My cover is blown, and my work here is done." "Wait," Chen called out. "What happens now? Do you return to whatever agency you really work for?" Isabella paused, considering the question. "I work for the same people you do, Major. I just do it from places where nobody thinks to look for threats." She picked up her mop bucket one last time. "Remember this, all of you. The most dangerous enemies are often the ones who hide in plain sight, and the most effective defenders are the ones nobody notices until it's time to act." As she walked toward the exit, Colonel Blackwood called after her. "Dr. Vasquez, will we see you again?" Isabella smiled, the first genuine smile anyone in the facility had ever seen from her. "If you do see me, Colonel, it probably means there's another crisis that requires someone nobody suspects to solve it." The command center doors closed behind her, leaving the officers to contemplate how completely they had misjudged the woman who had just saved them all. 3 hours later, maintenance personnel found Isabella's cleaning cart abandoned in a supply closet, along with a detailed technical manual explaining how to identify and prevent future infiltration attempts using quantum encryption protocols. Isabella herself had vanished as completely as she had first appeared, ready to assume whatever identity would be necessary for her next assignment in the shadow war that most people never knew was being fought. From which city are you watching this incredible story of hidden heroism? If Isabella's dedication to protecting America from the shadows moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more stories of unsung heroes who sacrifice recognition for duty.